The first book of Achee, chapter 3. It must needs be that I give an account of the rest of the 24 high priest communities, according to the vision of Achee. For I myself beheld by the Urim, even according to the same vision. And this is an account of the 7th, 8th, and 9th high priest communities, who begat Mashiach, which includes Abraham, Israel, and Joseph. And it came to pass that Achee viewed these high priest communities that were beyond his time, and he could feel the names of them when he beheld their righteous deeds. And his heart was made glad, and all this matter is of a great importance and benefit to all mankind, as in them they may see the formulation of the person of their Mashiach. And it may be known to man that Mashiach is the gift of God to them, that he is not from some mysterious place or condition, but that the Lord God, in his great love and respect for mankind and the agency of the righteous, has allowed that they may determine for themselves the being of Mashiach and the nature of his doings. And it will come to pass that the day will come that all men, wicked and righteous, will know and must affirm that Mashiach, who has healing in his wings for man, and the power to redeem them back into the presence of their Father in heaven, was indeed the Mashiach that righteous mankind all throughout the course of the earth begat, insomuch that they determined his vision in behalf of God, by the power of the intervention of their agency, and that he indeed is their Mashiach and belongs to them, as he in fact is the Son of Man. And it came to pass, as Achee beheld these things, he began to come to understand the great plan of redemption. He saw that all the acts of Mashiach upon the earth with man were called forth and established by the power of the element of righteousness, and he praised the Lord in his heart without ceasing. And it came to pass that the Lord opened up to his view the day of Abraham, and he beheld the day when Abraham had fallen to the earth, out of sorrow over the idols of his father. Now, the task of his father in the land of was to keep the house of the idols of the people, but Abraham loved the Lord. And it came to pass that Abraham determined in his heart that the Lord alone should be God, and he laid fire under the house of idols, and it was in the night. And when the people beheld the fire, one of the brothers of his father rushed into the house to save his idols, and was consumed in the flames. Now the people said that the death of this man who was named Harim was a sign that their idol gods were displeased with Terah, the father of Abraham, and they looked upon him with dishonor. Because of this dishonor, Terah was obliged to depart out of the land, and he journeyed northward. And it came to pass, when Terah had established himself by the banks of a river in a new land which he called Haran, after the name of his brother, who had perished in the flames, that he once again turned unto his idols. And no man knew it was Abraham who had laid the fire that destroyed the house of idols. But the child of Haran was named Lot. And Abraham felt responsible to the Lord to see to his care, and raise him up and be a father to him. And in the course of those days, Terah would not heed the pleas of his son to abandon his idols. So Abraham sought out the Lord, and was thus fallen down to the earth out of sorrow. And the Lord drew near and said unto him, My son, you are not responsible for the death of your uncle, but it was his great love for his idols that drew him into the flames. So be comforted, my son, and arise, and pray what you will, and it shall be done according to your word. And Abraham arose and cast his eyes at a distance, and saw the smoke arising, formed the cooking fires of his father's encampment. And he said, My Lord and my God, would you deliver me into a place where you alone are God, a place where I may live out my days in peace and walk with you and you alone? And the Lord revealed to him the course he should take to the southwest, to a place where the Lord alone was God. And Abraham told his father he was setting out to walk through the land. And Abraham left his father, and his father sang him a song of blessing. And it came to pass Abraham departed out of the land in the manner the Lord had shown unto him, and he arrived at a place just 2 hours' distance from the lair of Melchizedek. And Melchizedek became like a father to him, and taught him in all the things of God. And Abraham praised the Lord his God, and was comforted. And Abraham learned that Noah had died there at Mebunakash on the 5th day after the birth of Abraham. And Melchizedek said that his father Noah waited until Abraham was come before he departed from the earth. And because of the power of Melchizedek, the Lord alone was God in all that quarter of the land. And Abraham rested and praised the Lord. Now it came to pass that as Achee viewed these things, he saw war going on over the life of this man, Abraham. And Abraham knew nothing concerning the matter. But Semihazah knew that this very man would be the father of a people out of which would come Mashiach. And seeing Noah was departed, Semihazah was encouraged, and put forward and renewed his intention to be the son of God. And Semihazah conspired with all his hosts that if Abraham had a son, there would be the seeds planted that would allow him to be, in the course of time, born in the flesh, and thus become the Son of God in his image. And it was as he desired from the beginning in his wickedness. And the war was real, and there was a sober possibility that Semihazah would obtain his desires. But Abraham was strong in his love for the Lord, and in his determination that the Lord alone would be God. And even in the circumstances of his life in departing Haran, he already had determined that the Lord alone should be God. And because of the great love of this man for the Lord, the life of Abraham became before God the element of righteousness. And Abraham and his rib had to wait to conceive a son, until they considered it too late and impossible to have a child. And because of the vision of this man, his whole life was given unto the expectation of a son. Now this is a similitude in the manner of righteousness, like unto the world waiting for the birth of Mashiach. And for those preceding his birth, the time was long, and some even said it was past, as wickedness was great upon the earth, and was diverse, and was among all peoples. And it shall be the same in the end of days also, and the people shall say, the Lord delays his coming, for such great wickedness is in the land. Now it happened that our father Adam had already intervened with the element of righteousness, to the effect that there could be a covenant to love God. And because of this, Semihazah must needs become the son of God, by the seed of the only begotten of the heart of Abraham. For only out of the love of God in the heart of Abraham would his son be used as the element of righteousness. And thus a war over his son was raging. And it came to pass that Abraham had a firstborn, for Sarah had given unto him of her handmaid, but it was not the firstborn of his heart. And this first son came about when a woman defined the establishment of righteousness, which thing was decreed by Enoch must not be so. And this thing came about by the lack of faith of his wife in the vision of her husband. And the doing of Sarah displeased the Lord greatly, and she was of the lineage of Japeth. Reference number 53. Means to enlarge hell or to enlarge deceit. See Strong's number 3315 and number 6601. Who had found and brought back the ancient ways after the flood, and she too in her youth had studied in these wicked doings. And in this thing Semihazah determined he now had the upper hand, but it was not the son of the heart of Abraham, and thus he would not view this son as the element of righteousness before the Lord, because the child came in fornication. And it came to pass that Sarah his wife did in the time of her old age conceive, and unto Abraham was born the son of his heart in his love for the Lord. And in the life of this child the fate of all mankind hung in the balance. Now his mother had subtleties in her heart, and the war increased over Isaac, who was the son of Abraham. And Abraham loved Isaac, and he knew in his heart that in Isaac it would be proclaimed that the Lord alone was God. Now understand that Abraham had waited so long for his birth, and the vision of Isaac was so dear to the heart of Abraham, and so much a part of what his entire life had been, that the love of Abraham for Isaac set the bounds of love of a human father for a son. It was in fact heralding righteousness, proclaiming the love of God for his only begotten, and the war increased. And it came to pass, the Lord asked Abraham if he would give Isaac to him. And Abraham could feel the great desire of the Lord for him to be obedient. And the great high priest Abraham was strong in his obedience. And his faith was sure, and he knew nothing doubting that God had made this request of him. Abraham paid heed to the voice of the Lord, and he set out to inquire what it meant to give Isaac to God. And it came to pass that Abraham took Isaac, and Isaac was 33 years old, and went near unto the encampment of Melchizedek, according to the voice of the Lord. This place was the very place on the earth where Messiah submitted fully to the will of man, even at the same age. And he was at the place that was called Golgotha. And he built an altar unto the Lord, and he cried out to the Lord, and he said, Here is my son, he is yours. And he was willing to give Isaac unto the Lord. And Achee saw it was the man who set the boundaries of the love of a father for a son. Now the camp of Melchizedek was over across the way, but a little distance. And it was one of his lambs that was caught by its wool in the bush of thorns. Thus Abraham used the lamb of Melchizedek to covenant that Isaac belonged to God, and it was a lamb of the prince of Shabuah. Now the element of righteousness of Abraham in this thing was very great, and his obedience was diligent, and his love for God was so immense as he stood before him as a priest of the Most High God, that Semihazah shrank back and could not have any part in the son of the heart of Abraham. And the deeds of righteousness of Abraham in this thing were so powerful that he, as a priest, after the order of Melchizedek, actually called forth the very place and conditions whereby the Son of God would submit to the will of man as a son of the heart of God. And he established by his great faith that the Son of God would indeed be the only begotten of the Father, and there would be no more in that day or forever. Thus he frustrated the great plan of Semihazah during the entire course of the world. And now Semihazah would never be able to be a man in the flesh and in the image of God, but must forever remain a lowly and abhorrent rock. And thus did the great man Abraham accomplish that the Lord alone would be God for all mankind of every age. Through all these things the Son of Man received from Abraham a new name, which was the only begotten of God. And he called forth Messiah to come in such a way as to be the kindred of man, and a part of the family of mankind. And he beheld the day of Messiah, and his heart was made glad. Now Abraham was a brother of the Son, and he established that all men by the light of truth shall stand prepared of God at the last day, if they repent of their iniquities, by covenanting to be a child of the heart of God. For in this thing Abraham allowed God to use Messiah as the element of righteousness, as the son of his heart. And Semihazah was beaten, for he could not stand before the great love and faith of this man, nor could he overcome the element of righteousness wrought under his hand. For now the Lord alone is God, and there would be only one begotten of God, and Abraham was strong and a champion for all the righteous in all ages. But Semihazah seeks opportunity with the firstborn of fornication. Now these things have been hidden, and their meaning kept obscure in the eyes of all men until now. And Achee, seeing all this concerning the only begotten, knew that because of the element of righteousness of Abraham, all 24 communities were looking to only one Son of God, and they all established righteousness in relation to the one and only Son of Man. And these things were a curse upon Semihazah, but all nations were blessed by the doings of Abraham. And Achee looked again, and he beheld Jeshurun in the midst of all creation, which name by interpretation means to act in righteousness. Reference number 54. See Deuteronomy chapter 33, verse 5 and 26, and Isaiah chapter 44, verse 2, In Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 8 through 19, for use of Jeshurun in the Bible. And he said to the Lord, Lord, what is it that I am seeing? And the Lord said, Jeshurun is the foundation of the law of virtue that springs forth out of the heart of the Son of God. And they are also the 12 gifts of my offering to my Father, which were for the purpose of heralding to all creation the peace and tranquility of mankind. And in this way was the guidance of God in the beginning, given unto the entire family of mankind, by the dividing of the 12 sons of Adam. And the meaning of their names are the element of righteousness, according to my 12 gifts unto the Father. But the wickedness that preceded the flood overshadowed them, and in a man who was called Israel remains alone the inheritance of God in these things. And Achee said to the Lord, Lord, my heart yearns to know of the gifts you gave unto the Father, and how they are the foundation of the law of virtue. And the Lord opened this great mystery before the eyes of Achee, and withheld them not from his sight. And the Lord said, the first gift I gave unto the Father was you, and in oneness all men, and by the work of my hands he has the delight of being your Father. And I built you into the fabric of all creation for him, as he dwells there, and now you and he dwell together. And the second gift I gave unto my Father was the Spirit, so he could speak to you in all things, and so you could walk as his child, knowing him by his voice, as any child knows his father. And the third gift I gave unto my Father was your guardian angel, or that is to say, the element of your protection in the midst of the Eerkodeshoi, and your Father is comforted. And the fourth gift I laid before the feet of my Father was that you could have life, and have it in abundance, and it would flow like living water, so that his child could live life to its fullest, and my Father could have the delight of your passages. And the fifth gift I laid as a treasure before the feet of my Father was forgiveness for your sins. And the 24 elders who are the leaders of the Eerkodeshoi cast their crowns at his feet. And the sixth gift I gave unto my Father was the ability of all creation to love you in spite of your sins. And it was because of this grace that the love of the Father overflowed in gratitude toward me. And the seventh gift I gave unto the Father was his ability to reveal himself to you, unto the unfolding to you of all the mysteries of the kingdom. And by this your Father can whisper to you all the tender feelings of his heart, and you can know all things that bless you in whatsoever circumstance in life you find yourself. And the eighth gift I laid before the Father was his ability to restore your soul and raise you up in the resurrection, and for him to bless you to be able to thus forget your sorrows and wipe away all your tears and find rest with your loving Father. And the ninth gift that came before the eyes of the Father was the bread of life, which is your ability to be one in him as I am in him, that you may be one in us. And the Father in this way will always be joined unto you, and you can be secure and find life in him. And the 10th gift I gave unto the Father is for you to have children, and receive of the happiness of family, even as your Father in heaven has with you, and for you to prosper with your families, and you and your Father together may receive the joys and happiness of the passages of life. And the 11th gift was the gift that you, by the power of your repentance and the intervention of your agency, may be able to overcome struggles of life and be victorious over temptation and the oppression of evil and the fiery darts of Semihazah and all his band, and thus you may not have more than you are able to bear. And the 12th gift I gave unto him was Yahad, which by interpretation means the community of the elect, and those who walk in perfection of way, that he may dwell there with you, and all the workmanship of his hands in holiness, in the joy of eternity. And it came to pass that when Achee had beheld all these things, that he exclaimed that all these things were Jeshurun, and that Mashiach was prince of Jeshurun. And Achee said unto the Lord, Lord, "What does this man called Israel have to do with these things?" And the Lord swept his arm before him and opened up the vision before the eyes of Achee. And Achee beheld 2 infant babies in the day of their birth, and they were named by the midwives under the hand of their grandmother, and the one was called Harim, and the other Heel Grabber. And the thing displeased Abraham, for they were not names of righteousness. But Isaac was dull of hearing the Lord, because of the subtleties of his mother. And he allowed the names to stand over the protest of Rebekah. But Rebekah was a good mother and a valiant woman. And she hearkened unto the words of Abraham. And in these things the infant Israel was opposed by Semihazah, but he was guarded and protected and blessed by the hand of his mother. Now it came to pass that Semihazah brought to bear against Israel wickedness that he drew from Methuselah. For Methuselah had misused the element of the righteousness, and established that the firstling by right of birth should have privilege and status, and obtain the inheritance of substance, and thus rule over his brethren. And this thing was a wicked perversion, as the interventions of Adam were unto repentance, and not for to get gain. Now for the establishment of this wickedness, many generations of mankind will suffer. And it was for this cause that the grandfather of Noah, who was Methuselah, died in the great flood. He was firstborn unto Enoch, and Enoch was a great man. And Methuselah was left when Enoch fled with Zion. And he sought to justify his sins by changing the establishment of firstlings, to show forth that it was not his sin that caused him to remain, but his privilege. And it came to pass that this perversion in the day of Israel had been established for many years, so that it was embedded into the custom and habit of the people. And it was in this way that the vision of Israel was brought under the dominance of Semihazah. But Abraham blessed Israel, and he caused that the blessing of Rebekah upon her son would be multiplied. Reference number 55. For a reading of these blessings, see Charlesworth, Volume 2, page 97 through 99, 105 through 106. And Isaac was slow to hear before the Lord, and Abraham caused Rebekah to gain for Israel his rightful blessing. But because of the wickedness of Methuselah, shame was brought to bear upon her and Israel, and he was obliged to flee from the house of his father. And Israel was a good man, and was of a mild and tender heart, and he pleased the Lord. Now it was in those days among the kindred of Israel a frightful and dishonorable thing to leave the dwelling place of your father, and the heart of Israel was heavy with sorrow as he departed. In the midst of his travels he stopped to rest upon the Sabbath, for he had departed in haste on the 6th day. And as he prepared to rest, he lay grieving at these circumstances, and his heart was pained to leave his mother. And the Lord said to him, Arise, my son, and pray, and declare what you will, and it shall be done according to your word. And Israel was moved, and he set up a stone as a witness, and he said, Abedel, this day you are my witness, that when I pass this way again, in my returning unto my people, I shall be surrounded by and be in the midst of peace, and my shame shall be blotted out, and I shall be pleasing unto the Lord. And he sang a song unto Abedel. Reference number 56. For this song, see Charlesworth, L.H., The Old Testament, Pseudepigrapha, Volume 2, page 408. And now the Lord said unto Achee, when he had done thus, I could not constrain myself, and I drew near, for my heart was moved. And I hailed him as grandfather, and he was astonished to be called thus. And he fell to the earth, and I spoke tenderly to him, and I told him of his vision, and his name in righteousness. And I opened unto him another vision. And he looked, and he saw a column of faces leading upward, and there were 12 pairs in number. And on the power side were the 12 faces of the sons of Adam, that were divided in the land as the foundations of the law, and were called Jeshurun, and they were for the entire family of man. On the glory side were the 12 faces of the sons of Israel, but he knew them not. And these faces led upward unto my face, which was before him. And I showed him the 12 gifts that I have given unto my father, and I told him they were called Jeshurun. And there was a corresponding name for each gift, and the element of righteousness in each gift of the sons of Adam. And the sons of Adam were called after this manner, starting with the eldest, Cain, which means to strike quickly or to chant. Reference number 57. See Strong's number 7014, 6969. Abel, which means a gift from God. Reference number 58. See Strong's number 1890 for the original meaning. See number 1891, number 1892, number 1893 for later meanings. Mabuki, which means a living fountain. Reference number 59. See Strong's number 4002, 2418. Nafash, which means to be refreshed or to breathe again. Reference number 60. See Strong's number 5314. Set, which means to put or to place. Reference number 61. See Strong's number 8352, 7896. Allah, which means to be strong. Reference number 62. See Strong's number 414, to be strong like an oak tree. Maikar, which means sweetly righteous. Reference number 63. See Strong's number 4339. Azan, which means to broaden out the ears with the hands. Reference number 64. See Strong's number 238. Asher, which means a cedar tree. Reference number 65. See Strong's number 839. Yaakov, which means to endure or overcome. See reference number 66. See Strong's number 3201. Kathan, which means to give in marriage. Reference number 67. See Strong's number 2860, 2859. Edra, which means the arm of the Father or fire. Reference number 68. See Strong's number 153, 143. And Eerkodeshoi, which means a city of holiness. Reference number 69. See Strong's number 5892, 6949. Watcher of holiness and a city of holiness are the same word. It is the original name for Zion. And these were the sons of Adam that were used by him to establish Jeshurun in the days of the city of Enoch. And he beheld all these things, and the greatness of the gifts, and he exclaimed to me, How is it that you hailed me as grandfather, seeing that I am destitute and have no family nor wife? And I said unto him, These gifts are the foundation of the law, whereby the law of virtue can abide in the heart of man, that mankind can have peace and tranquility. And they were given unto mankind in the sons of Adam, and were overshadowed in wickedness before the flood. But now it is your vision of created purpose as Israel, that this foundation of the law be once again established. And now they will be before a holy nation, that I may in the course of time be born among men of your seed. And thus I hailed you as grandfather. And Israel worshipped before me. And the Lord said, These other 12 faces are the faces of your children, for I shall make of you a great nation, and among your seed will the law of virtue be established, that your people shall have one among them called Mashiach. And it came to pass that Israel exclaimed, This is the very house of God, built with the building blocks that are your 12 gifts for the Father. Jeshurun is none other than the gateway to heaven. And it came to pass that Israel poured oil upon the rock of witness, and declared that when he had seed, they would be for the element of righteousness. to establish Jeshurun forever among his people, and thus lay the foundation of the law, so that among them virtue can bring to pass the coming of Mashiach. And I was about to depart away from him, and he laid hold of my garment, and would not that I should leave him. So great was his love for me and his comfort at the view of his vision. But I touched him, and he allowed me to withdraw, and he blessed the name of his God and the Mashiach of Abraham. Reference number 70. Charlesworth, OPCIT Volume 2, page 407, has the best reading of this story. And it came to pass that Semihazah sought occasion against him, as he saw that if Israel were to accomplish his vision, that the Son of God would be born of woman among his seed. And it came to pass that Israel went into the house of Laban, and he found a maiden of his choosing. And Laban agreed with him, that if he labored for him among his flocks, that in 7 years he could take Rachel to wife. And Semihazah put it into the heart of Laban his servant, who worshipped idols, that he may cause by deceit that Israel surely would live in fornication, and receive another who was not his rib. And Israel grieved and labored on until he received his rib to wife. Now through the course of these things Melchizedek remained upon the earth until Israel had his Rachel. And he did this to guard him and protect him. And as a high priest, take upon himself the burden of his sins of fornication, and pray that God would forgive him, and not allow Semihazah to prevail. And when Israel had his Rachel, Melchizedek departed away, and no man knows where he went. But it was said by some that he and Zedeketelebab dwelt among their Eerkodeshoi. And it came to pass in the course of his life, and by the hand of God, Israel did return in peace unto his mother and the land of his family. And it happened according to his record of witness with Abel. And through those days he had 12 sons, like unto the 12 faces that he saw. Reference number 71. I saw with the Urim that these 12 faces included Dan. And it came to pass, Israel took his family and went before the rock of witness and encamped there. This was done when Benjamin, his youngest son, was a lad. And Israel, after some days of prayer and fasting, built an altar unto the Lord. And he had no one to bless it, for the song of Eve and the dance had passed with the subtlety of Sarah. Nevertheless, Leah blessed the altar for Israel, and he took his sons, and caused them to stand before the altar as the element of righteousness. And it came to pass that after he prayed, he sounded the trump of summons to all the Eerkodeshoi, and he proclaimed that Asher, reference number 72, Asher, to be happy, to be straight, to be honest and happy. Adam used his son Asher here. See Strong's number 836 and 833. Would be the element of righteousness, that the first gift, you, of Mashiach to his father, would result in the law of virtue, bringing you to be honest and happy and good before the Lord. And he asked the Eerkodeshoi to accept the first gift of Mashiach as a part of the fabric of all creation, and it was so. And Israel sounded the trump again, and he told the Eerkodeshoi that Simeon, reference number 73, Simeon, hearing, Adam used azan. See Strong's number 8095 and 8085. Would be the element of righteousness, so that the second gift, the spirit of Mashiach to his father, would result in the law of virtue, allowing you to always have the spirit to guide you in being virtuous. And he asked the Eerkodeshoi to build the spirit into all the fabric of creation in behalf of you and Mashiach, and it was so. And it came to pass that Israel, by the strength of his hand, sounded the trump of summons a third time, to proclaim that Gad, reference number 74, Gad, to crowd upon, to attack. Adam would have used Cain, but he could not. He substituted Allah for him instead. See Strong's number 1410 and 1464. Would be the element of righteousness for the third gift, protection, of Mashiach to his father, and that it would be the foundation of the law, for by the law you would always live under the protecting hand of God, but without the law, you would live to view days of violence. And he declared that all the Eerkodeshoi would be his witness to this decree and build the gift of protection that Mashiach had given to his Father for you into the fabric of all things. And it was so. Now Israel bestowed names upon his sons that were from the beginning the element of righteousness, and he knew the vision of Joseph. And Joseph, because of his vision, was dear unto the heart of Israel. And because he was the son of his rib, Israel had a coat of many colors prepared for Joseph. And he used him and his coat as the element of righteousness to declare his covenant. Thus Joseph represented to Israel a surety that Mashiach, who hailed him as grandfather, would come in the flesh among his people, to give them abundant life as the living water. And Israel placed the coat upon Joseph and sounded the trump, and the Eerkodeshoi drew near. And Israel declared with the strength of his heart with tears that Joseph, reference number 75, Joseph, to add to, augment, make full, Adam used, Mabuki, see Strong's number 3130 and 3254, would be the element of righteousness, that the fourth gift, the living water of Mashiach to his Father, would be the foundation of the law, so that you would by Mashiach have life, and have it more abundantly. And he declared to all the Eerkodeshoi that the living water would be always a part of the fabric of creation in your behalf, and it was so. Now after Joseph was thus used to call forth the abundant life that comes from the law of virtue, Israel sounded the trump for the 5th time to summon all the Eerkodeshoi, and he used Issachar, reference number 76. Issachar, he will bring a treasure. Adam used Set, Strong's number 3485, as the element of righteousness to establish that the 5th gift, atonement, Mashiach gave to his Father would result in the law of virtue bringing forgiveness of sins to you by repentance for the remission of sins. And he decreed before all the Eerkodeshoi that the forgiving grace of Mashiach would be built into all the fabric of creation, and it was so. And it came to pass, Israel blew the trump of summons for a 6th time, and used Judah, reference number 77. Judah, the open hand. There is the means to accomplish something. Adam used Elah, see Strong's number 3063, number 3034, number 3027, as the element of righteousness to establish that the 6th gift, power, of Mashiach for his Father would bring the law of virtue forth, so you could be loved by God in spite of your sins. And by your keeping the law, God would be justified in loving you thus. And he asked all the Eerkodeshoi that they would always call you into remembrance before God, so that you would always be found to have the means of receiving the love of God. And it was so. And Israel took the lad, Benjamin, and he stood him forth, and he put a reed scepter in his hand. And he sounded the trump for the 7th time, and he called forth the Eerkodeshoi to use his son, Benjamin, reference number 78. Benjamin, son of the right hand or glory hand. Adam used Edra, see Strong's number 1144, as the element of righteousness, as his mother was not there to see him, and Israel wept, reference number 79. Israel blamed himself for the death of Rachel when she died at the birth of Benjamin, because he inadvertently had cursed her unto death when she had stolen the idols of her father. See Genesis chapter 31, verse 17 through 36. And he established that the law of virtue would be among all the fabric of creation, so that the 7th gift, glory of Mashiach to his Father, would cause that you would, by keeping the law of virtue, always find yourself in such a state that God could reveal himself to you according to your need, and the Eerkodeshoi agreed to do so. And Israel sounded the trump to the Eerkodeshoi for the 8th time, And he caused Joseph to once again step forward as the element of righteousness before the Lord. And he stood before the altar, and Israel declared to all the Eerkodeshoi that the eighth gift, the resurrection of Mashiach to his father, would be upheld by the establishment of the law of virtue, so that Mashiach could bring you forth from the dead to stand before God, and that you also could be renewed in this life by forgiveness, and find the happiness of forgetting sin and affliction, and become whole before him in the purity of renewal. And he decreed that the newness of the life of God would be built into the fabric of all creation, and it was so. And in this thing, Joseph was again the element of righteousness, as when he was discovered alive. It was like unto a resurrection unto his father. Now it came to pass, Israel used Joseph 2 times before the altar, and would not suffer Dan to step forward and become the element of righteousness, as Israel had beheld that Dan would choose the lying vision of Semihazah, and be like unto a poisonous serpent. Reference number 80. Dan, to judge. See Strong's number 1835. Wherefore, because of the Song of Eve, the altar could only be used in relation to the Lord having all things according to his will, and that it was likened unto a mild and harmless serpent, and it was Dan who conspired to kill Joseph, and he was the one who had killed the kid and soaked the coat in blood to be taken to their father. It was in this way that the vengeance of Dan was indeed like unto a poisonous serpent, for all his doings caused death in the family of Israel and much grieving. And Israel grieved many long years because of the doings of this man Dan. But the doings of the Lord are profound. And Joseph stood in this case in behalf of a son he would yet have, whose name would be Manasseh. Reference number 81. Manasseh, causing to forget, to remove, death, thus the resurrection. Adam used Nephash. See Strong's number 4519 and number 5382. In which name is the element of righteousness. And it came to pass that Israel sounded the trump for the 9th time to summon all the Eerkodeshoi, and used Levi, reference number 82, Levi, to attach, be intertwined with God. Adam used Micah, see Strong's number 3878 and number 3867, as the element of righteousness, to call forth and establish the law of virtue, so that you could benefit from the 9th gift, bread of life, of Mashiach to his Father, and be attached in your soul unto all the living. And thus Mashiach by the law gave to you the breath of life, or that is to say, the body of the Mashiach in all element, to be a holy banquet before God, and the Eerkodeshoi agreed to do so. And Israel sounded the trump yet again the 10th time, to use Reuben, reference number 83. Reuben, you see a son, you see a builder of the family. Adam used Kathan, see Strong's number 7205 and number 1121, as the element of righteousness, to call forth and establish the 10th gift, family, of Mashiach to his Father, that you, by keeping the law of virtue, could always be a part of the family of God. And he implored the Eerkodeshoi to write the law of virtue into all things, so that you would stand in kinship before God in heaven, and it was according to his word. And Israel sounded the trump for the 11th time, to herald the 11th gift, to endure of Mashiach to his Father, which is for him to be with you in your struggles. Thus he used Naphtali, reference number 84. Naphtali, to struggle, wrestle. Adam used Yaakov, Strong's number 5321, as the element of righteousness, to establish the law of virtue in all things, so that you would always prosper in your family and be victorious in your struggles, and find peace in the law of virtue, and a refuge in perfection of way. And he requested that the Eerkodeshoi build into all things the success of your life struggles by your keeping the law of virtue. And Israel sounded the trump for the last time, for the 12th gift, Zion, Mashiach gave to his Father, so that by the law of virtue you could dwell with God in community, and the holy city could be your resting place. He decreed forever that by his people keeping the law, they would dwell with God, and it was so. Thus he used Zebulun, reference number 85. Zebulun, habitation. Adam used his youngest son, Eerkodeshoi. See Strong's number 2074. As the element of righteousness before the altar of the Lord, to call forth Zion among his people by the power of the law, which Zion was called Ma'in in the days of Adam. Now it came to pass that all these things were done before the altar that was at the rock of witness, upon which Israel had poured the oil, and his sons did not know that which he had just done. For he had taken Jeshurun, the 12 gifts that Mashiach gave to his father, which are the foundation of the law of God, and he established the law for his people forever. For it had been given to all mankind in the days of Adam, but was now given unto his people to prepare them to have Mashiach, that he would, in the course of time, be born among them. Thus we see that without these gifts, and without the law which undergirds Mashiach, he could not have been born among men into a nation unless they were sufficiently virtuous in so much as he, the Son of God, could live out the vision of his created purpose among them. For without the law of virtue, there would have been no one to keep the law of the king and support him to live out his life without sin. But similarly, without confronting a false law, he could not have descended below all things and offered his life as the Son of God in behalf of the wicked, for a heathen nation would not have used him as the element of righteousness. So it was by the Mashiach that the law came, and it was by Mashiach that Jeshurun now applied unto the righteous nation that sprang forth from this man Israel. And it was Israel that brought the law unto the children of his nation by the doings of his hands in righteousness. Reference number 86. The law actually came by Moses, but it was because of Israel's righteousness. And it came to pass that Achee beheld that after these things the sons of Israel disputed as to whom among them should be the greatest, insomuch that some of them polluted these works of righteousness before the Lord all their days. And the effect of it was that the power of the righteousness of their father in their behalf was greatly diminished, insomuch that they were obliged to go into slavery in a far country, which thing was not a part of their vision of created purpose. For had they been righteous and upright before the Lord in all their doings, no such thing would have transpired among them. And their disobedience was so severe that when they did receive the law, it was a false law, which brought them violence and sorrow in place of peace and tranquility. But you shall see that the real law of virtue was called forth in their midst a few generations before the birth of Mashiach. And there was a holy community that was willing to keep the law of virtue and walk in perfection of way. And they came indeed to walk with and support Mashiach when he came in the flesh. Now a man drawn out of water had been sent to deliver Israel out of slavery and establish the law of virtue among them, but they would not. And it came to pass that they rejected him, and his own family supported the people in their casting him out from among them. And this man, who was to deliver them, departed his way, and the people of Israel chose for themselves a law that sprang forth from the nation of the descendants of those who remained from the great tower. And after many generations and much bloodshed, one called Goker Harim the first came and established the law of virtue and the domain of Jeshurun. And thus when Mashiach came, the people were prepared, and Mashiach was victorious by their hand. Now because of this man, Israel, the hills knew the feet of God, and Israel was a brother to the hills. And Israel gave Mashiach a new name, and it was the Prince of Peace. And Achee beheld that the false law did not bring peace during the entire course of the earth. And Israel established the meaning of virtue among the peoples and in families. And the Lord said to Achee, You will see that because of this man, I am able to be, before my Father and in behalf of all men, the definition of all human virtue for all eternity, and that the virtue that I accomplished during my walk in the flesh, by my keeping the law, will be the standard of virtue against which all men will be judged. And there is much yet to be revealed unto you regarding this matter. Now it came to pass that the Lord opened up to Achee the rest of the 24 high priest communities. And the vision is long, but this is an account of it, for I too beheld it all before the Urim. And it came to pass that Achee looked again, and he saw that Dan was angered, for he was a man of great temper. And he interrupted the worship of Israel before the altar of the Lord, and declared that he was humiliated before his brethren. For Joseph to be used as the element of righteousness in his stead. And he left from before the altar in the midst of the prayers of his father, which thing is an abomination before the Lord. And it came to pass that when the ceremony was completed, Israel unfolded unto his sons all of his vision before the rock of witness. And he told them he had called forth Jeshurun and the law of virtue to come forth among them and their children, so they could be a holy nation before the Lord. And he rehearsed unto them that it was the plan of Semihazah to break them up and scatter them abroad, to prevent Mashiach from being born among the people of a holy nation. And many things did their father exhort unto them before the altar, and he called Dan unto repentance, and beseeched him to cling unto the vision of his created purpose, and that by doing this he may yet find happiness, to be numbered with his children among the people of a holy nation. But Dan would not. And it came to pass in the days that followed, the contention grew among the brethren of Joseph, insomuch that their father found a need to send them away unto far pastures to tend the flocks. But Joseph and Benjamin he kept by his side. And Israel prayed for forgiveness before the Lord, as he feared that he had sinned. For in his vision he had seen 12 faces, but he had only used 11 sons as the element of righteousness, and thus he grieved, supposing he was the cause of so great contentions among his sons. And the women of his household mourned with him, and Bilhah, the mother of Dan, refused to be comforted. And it came to pass that Israel prayed for God to forgive him. And the Lord spoke to him and told him to be comforted. And Israel could see that his use of element had been pleasing unto the Lord, as the Lord forbids jealousy and sin to come before the altar. And thus Dan was rightly held back. And Achee saw that Adam held back in like manner, and did not use Cain when Jeshurun was first called forth. And that same night Joseph dreamed a dream, and in the dream the Lord rehearsed unto him all the visions of his father, and told him that if his brethren did not repent to revere righteousness, and if Dan did not turn and embrace the vision of his created purpose, Semihazah may be empowered to destroy the vision and purpose of a holy nation into which Mashiach could be born. And it would come to pass that Joseph would rule over his brethren, and many of the children of his father would be scattered abroad. And when his brethren returned from their flocks, he told the dream, and contention grew among them. And Joseph repented before the Lord for having dreamed the dream. And behold, that night he dreamed a dream the second time like unto it. And when he rehearsed it unto his father, Israel began to fear for his son, should it come again unto the ears of his brethren. So he sent them away again, this time unto far pastures for the season. But Joseph and Benjamin he kept by his side. And thus it was in this way that their father dwelt through the season of pasture. And they stood in danger of brigands with their men in far pastures. And it came to pass, when the men returned home, the contention seemed to have passed, and Israel was comforted. And when their season of pasture came again, the sons of Israel were desirous to return unto the far pastures, as there was much grass there and water, and they remained again for the season. And it came to pass that Israel began to be lonesome for his sons, and it seemed that they delayed their return at the end of the season of pasture. So he sent Joseph out to seek after their welfare, As Joseph arrived to the place where they were, his brethren beheld him approaching, and they knew him by his coat of many colors. And Dan rose up in anger and prepared to meet his brother to slay him, for he supposed he approached to act as their overseer. But Reuben, the builder of the family of the Lord, could not bear such violence upon the beloved of his father, and he restrained him. And his brethren went out to meet him, and took hold of him, and cast him into a pit to protect him from the hand of Dan. And it came to pass that Judah and Naphtali persuaded some of their brethren to take Dan with them to water the sheep. And they gave their word that they would take care to see that Joseph would not be there upon their return. Now Dan was content, for he supposed they meant to kill him in his absence. But while he was away, Judah and Naphtali espied a caravan approaching, and determined to sell Joseph, and later go and buy him back unto their father, as soon as the anger of Dan passed. And it came to pass that they lifted Joseph out of the pit, and as they bound him, Joseph exclaimed, "What is it that you do?" And Judah said, "We must sell you to save your life." And Joseph looked into the eyes of Judah and cried, "What of the vision of our father of the holy nation?" And the thing pierced the heart of Judah, and they sold Joseph. And it came to pass, when Dan and his brethren returned and discovered that Joseph had been sold instead of slain, Dan was wroth, and he declared that if any man should make this thing known unto their father, he would be slain. And the anger of Dan was great, and they all gave him their word that they would never disclose unto their father that Joseph was sold. And it came to pass that Dan took a kid and killed it in his fury. And he rent the coat of many colors, and put the blood upon it in anger, and required that they deliver it up unto their father. And the coat of many colors that was used before the altar as the element of righteousness, to show forth the surety of the birth of Mashiach among their people, became the mark of their word to lie, and to not disclose the truth. And thus Dan became content, for he knew that should his father come to know concerning the matter, he would be compelled to also journey with all his brethren into the land of the far country in search of Joseph. And Dan was also bitter, since Reuben would get the inheritance after the manner of Methuselah, and it would profit him nothing to proceed into a strange land. And thus was Joseph taken bound into the land of a far country, and he was handled like unto one of their cattle, having no hope of rescue. And it came to pass that Joseph was thrown bound upon the sand among the beasts of burden, to rest for the night. And Joseph wept, for his heart was bound up with the soul of his father. And he cried out all that night in agony over the loss of the vision of his father. Each night after traveling, it would be thus for him. And he would weep in the night over the vision of his father. And it came to pass that 3 nights passed in this way for Joseph. In the evening of the 4th night, Semihazah came before him and mocked him, and declared that now Mashiach could not be born upon the earth in the flesh, as there would be no holy nation. For now the family of Heel-grabber would be scattered among the peoples of the land, and Joseph cried out for deliverance. And it came to pass that in the midst of his despair the Lord appeared unto him, and he gently knelt down beside him and loosened his bonds. And he said, "I am the God of your fathers, my little son. Arise and pray whatsoever you will, and it shall be done even as you speak. For I have committed the vision of your father into your hands, and you shall be like unto your father Abraham before me. So fear not to go into this far country, but be of good cheer, for I will go before you. And all things shall be accomplished according to the vision of your father." And Joseph was comforted and slept soundly the remainder of the night. And it came to pass that in the morning Joseph was up early, and set himself about the task of watering the animals, and seeing to their care. And when the merchants awoke, they were astonished to see that he was not bound, and happily tending to the care of their animals. And they said among themselves, "This is no ordinary slave. He will fetch a handsome price." Thus it was in this way that when they arrived in the far country and encamped at their usual place among the shipmen of the river, they held him back from selling him. and took him near unto the house of the king, and there all men could behold his willing countenance, and they were well pleased with him. And it came to pass that Joseph was brought by a servant of the king, and Joseph was a willing worker, and he prayed for the house of his master and the welfare of all his doings. And he put a blessing upon his house, he being a priest of the Most High God. It was because of this that all things under the hand of his master prospered, and Joseph waited upon the Lord for him to reveal unto him the manner in which the vision of his father would be accomplished. Now Semihazah knew that Joseph was a high priest after the manner of the holy order of Melchizedek, and he greatly feared that he would use the element of righteousness, and by his cunning, and by the hand of those who would give heed unto his word, Semihazah conspired to put Joseph into a position to be cast into prison. And it was in this way that he sought to deprive him of the use of any element, and thus could evil accomplish their designs against him, in spite of the blessing upon the house of his master. But Joseph was not afraid, for he knew the Lord would abide by his word to him. And Joseph repented of all his sins continually, and he prayed for all those who were in prison with him. He prayed for his keeper, and he healed him in his sickness. And he caused contention to pass from among those before him, who were under the care of his keeper, and they all were content. Now this thing went against the plan of Semihazah, for he had seen Joseph go from being a favored son of a free man into being a slave, and from being a slave into becoming a lowly prisoner. And it was his intent to have Joseph killed in prison during times of contention. But the prayers of this kind young man brought peace. And in this way were the plans of Semihazah frustrated, and his evil intentions against the vision of Israel were brought to nothing before the prayers of a high priest. And it came to pass during the course of those days, as Joseph was calling upon the name of the Lord, that the Lord drew near unto him in the night. And the Lord rehearsed unto him a ceremony that he must do, using the element of righteousness, to call forth a great drought upon the land. Thus would all the household of his father be brought together in this far country, unto the fulfilling of all the vision of his father. And Semihazah rejoiced, as there was no element of righteousness before the face of Joseph. But Joseph put his trust in the Lord, and his faith did not waver. And he overcame the taunts of Semihazah, and he prayed before the Lord that he would deliver the element of righteousness into his hand. Now Joseph was known to be mild and good, and of a happy countenance before all who knew him in prison. And it came to pass that a young lad was cast into prison for a short time for some mischief, and he was afraid. And he came to be cared for by Joseph in order to comfort the lad. And in those days the mother of the lad visited him weeping. And she brought him a bunch of flowers from the banks of the river, and the flowers comforted him. So Joseph dried the flowers and saved them for him. And one day the mother of the lad came for him, and he was released into her arms. But Joseph had the flowers, and when he beheld them, he discovered that they were Nahukas flowers, the very ones that his father had rehearsed unto him, that were upon the water tablet of Noah. Reference number 87. Nahukas means the throne of a mighty one, and he carefully saved them unto his bosom. And it came to pass that Joseph inquired of the Lord, and the Lord revealed unto him the manner in which he must use the flowers, as the element of righteousness. And the Lord again told him to call forth a great drought upon the land, that thereby the household of his father would be brought into the land and established as a nation. And it came to pass that Joseph, he being a priest of the Most High God, using some crumbs of meal that fell by the wayside at the millstones of the prison, and using the flowers, he performed the ceremony in prison by himself. And he called forth the Eerkodeshoi, and instructed them according to the words of the Lord. And the millstones of the prison were his altar and his rocks of witness. Thus by small means are the great doings of God accomplished. And Semihazah is seen to be nothing before the face of the element of righteousness, under the hand of one who is always in the midst of repentance. And it came to pass after these things that the king had dreams upon his bed, and no man could know the meaning thereof. And they called Joseph to be brought out of prison, for his reputation was known by the guard of the king. And Joseph unfolded unto the king the meaning of his dreams, for they were according to his prayers. And his dreams told of years of rain and plenty, followed by drought and years of famine. And all could tell who heard that there was truth in the words of Joseph. And the matter pleased the king, for in those days kings were looked upon as gods, to know all things concerning the welfare of the people. And they took great delight to accurately know the future, for thus were their lying visions established among the people. For it came to pass that Joseph did not know, in the humility of his heart, the full extent of the effects of the element of righteousness that was under his hand. For he had called forth by himself in prison the conditions upon which Messiah would always be the God of his fathers, and the fathers of all the righteous henceforth and forever. And he established that there would be a common bond among all the righteous, like unto the bond between him and his father. And he had also established the conditions whereby Messiah could have persons called prophets, who by the name of their calling could establish the vision of peoples and nations and countries. And it was because of this that Messiah could be born with the vision of a spiritual heritage. Before Israel, there were no nation prophets on the earth. Reference number 88. Evidently, the author sees prophets as exclusively those who deal with the visions of nations. And thus were the designs of Semihazah frustrated in his desire to have the children of Israel scattered and dispersed before they could become a holy nation under the law, with their God being the God of Melchizedek and Abraham. Now the affairs of the household of the father of Joseph after his departure into the far country were on this wise. The mother of Dan perished of a broken heart in her grieving over the sins of her son, for Naphtali his brother had informed her privately as to the doings of Dan, and the sister of them all died in like manner also. Thus did Israel suffer great afflictions for a space of time, and Semihazah gained success over him, and there was a war against him to prevent Jeshurun. And it came to pass that when the great drought began to appear in its second year, Dan had determined in his heart to leave the dwelling place of his father, and his father gave him provisions for 1 season of pasture, and Dan departed toward the seashore. But his youngest son, who was called Shem, reference number 89, means to be eager with excitement. See Strong's number 2366 and number 2363. He, being very young, desired to remain with his grandfather, and he was sore afraid to depart. And Dan declared that he would return for him in some future day. And it came to pass that Dan departed and traveled along the seashore, and there he discovered some few families that were shipwrecked, and their provisions were low, and they stood in need. Dan gave unto them of his provisions and settled among them, and he became a protector for them, and was thus held in high regard among them. And it came to pass that in the course of time these people became known as Philistines, and the Lord showed Achee that they would fight against the vision of Israel all throughout the days of the earth. And thus we see that Semihazah seeks the overthrow of all things good and holy before the face of God, and he was empowered to do this by the misuse of the element of righteousness and the coat of many colors. And it came to pass, as the drought began to manifest itself, Israel and his family were obliged to journey unto the far country to obtain food. And there they discovered that Joseph was the overseer of the treasury of the king. It was he that obtained the hirelings to tend the flocks of the king, and it was he also that collected the payment for food from the storehouse of the king. And it came to pass that Joseph set a rule that it must be he that received payment from any who were found to be traveling from a distant land to obtain food, for he supposed in this way he might discover if the household of his father may come into the land. It would have been easy for him to give his task unto another, but he held to do it himself despite the protest of his fellows. And it came to pass he discovered his brethren, and in the course of time it became known unto Israel of all the doings of Dan. Reference number 90. See Revelations chapter 7, verse 4 through 8. King James Version. Isn't it interesting that Dan is not listed in the tribes of Israel in the book of Revelations? And he rejoiced to hear of the visit of the Lord and promised to his son Joseph. Now Israel had suffered with the grief of loss for 14 years before his heart was comforted. And he gathered up all his house and journeyed unto the lands of the far country. And they all became the hirelings of the king under Joseph. And Joseph affirmed the vision of his father, and thereby established that his father Israel was the first prophet of God, and that he showed forth the vision of his nation, and established the righteousness of Jeshurun in their behalf. And Joseph called forth and established Messiah, that he is the God of a holy nation, and he named him the God of our fathers. Joseph is the brother to reign, which teaches patience, and whose name means God has blessed. And as brother to Raphael, and as a priest of the Most High God, he had great power like unto Noah in regards to the heavenly tablets. This concludes the first book of Achee, chapter 3. Shalom.